basically this little guy on the back. This is a guy from Calgary that makes these. Basically just like a little like an ambient reverb, just to sort of give the just to give it a little bit sort of a life to it. Basically, sort of it sounds pretty dull without a reverb pedal, so you know you sort of do it. So yeah, reverb. I find when I'm using a lot of sort of heavy distortion, I find reverb sort of tends to kind of get in the way a lot of the times. So usually if I'm using sort of higher gain stuff, I'll sort of avoid using reverb. So usually like clean stuff, if you want to get like all ambient-y, you can sort of very cool. Sounds good. Basically, effect order is sort of important to get them all working together and sort of understanding the way they work. Usually, basically the way you do it is you have sort of gain stuff like fuzz, distortion first, and then have your reverbs and stuff all after it. Because basically the reason you do that is because when you have reverb running into a distortion, it's distorting the reverbs. So you don't really want to have the reverbs distorted by the distortion pedal. So that's why you usually have reverb dead last. The way I sort of order my pedals is I basically use sort of like what I call like the old school method, where basically in the 70s, guitar players didn't have any fancy sort of routing options for putting effects pedals. So they all just sort of ran them into the front of the amp. And that's basically what I do for my pedal. I just basically have my cable going in, and all the doodads are all connected together, and then they go straight into the amp. A lot of amps will have what's called like an effects loop. And basically an effects loop is, if you can sort of imagine the way an amp works, you have a preamp, you have a power amp, and that's your whole amplifier. The preamp's doing any sort of like tone shaping, basically making sort of the sound, and the power amp is basically amplifying that sound to ear-splitting volumes in some cases. An effects loop basically plugs the pedals in between those two things, so that the preamp is sort of separate from the pedals. It's not coloring the sound of the pedals that are after it. But generally, you only really need to use your effects loop if you're using distortion in your preamp side. So if you're using the gain on this guy, you tend to want to put like reverbs, tremolos, delays. You want to put those all after the distortion, just so that it's sort of cleaner sounding. So yeah, generally, like I said, fuzz and distortion in front, and then your basically your reverbs and your tremolo and your back. So anyway, continuing to go backwards through the chain is tremolo. Basically just taking the volume and dipping it up and down. Relatively simple effect. This is probably like one of the oldest kind of effects that they sort of came out with. Old Fender amps used to do this. You can actually add reverb on it as well. Sort of good. It's funny, I never really was a tremolo kind of guy.
Yeah.
For a very long time, I was sort of a wanky guitar player. So tremolo doesn't really work when you're sort of like. So as it's sort of like an experiment for myself, and this is sort of another reason why effects pedals are so cool, and you mentioned it as well. A lot of the times people get played by effects pedals. And a lot of people will sort of be like, oh, this guy's got a bunch of effects pedals in front of him. He's hiding behind them. Well, in a way, that is true. You are using them to sort of augment your sound. But I find certain pedals will make me play differently. So I find that's a really cool way to sort of get yourself sort of changing the way you think about approaching the guitar. And tremolo's a huge one that sort of got me to be like, well, maybe I should stop wanking and playing Van Halen riffs and start trying to figure out really nice chords to play, you know? So, because tremolo basically forces you to play chords. So, that was one thing that I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. Really cool effect. I agree. The next sort of effect in the chain is delay, and delay is basically just taking your signal and repeating it over a certain amount of time. So, in the case of this puppy, just repeating. And what's cool with a lot of delays nowadays is you can actually tap in the tempo of your delay. So basically, you just follow. So it sort of adds. It's another thing that sort of kicked me in the ass for playing, is it sort of gives you sort of this rhythmic sort of thing you can do with pedals. You can sort of get into like odd rhythms. You can actually set a lot of pedals with tap tempo for time-based stuff. Is you can set basically what's called the subdivisions, and basically that's basically you can tap in the tempo of a song, but instead of having the delay repeat on that tap, you can actually set it so that when you tap in the tempo, it will do like basically set the time within the offbeat of what you just tapped in. So you can do cool stuff like. So having a delay pedal that can do that is really helpful for sort of not only changing the delay time without actually going and doing that. And
Most of them do that, or just that one?
just that one. A lot of pedals that are basically like time based, you would call them. So like we'll get into it later, but flangers and phasers and choruses, they're all what's called a time based pedal, and usually you can tap in a tempo for that pedal. And it basically, like, if it's like a whooshing sound, it'll time within the whoosh. It's really cool for getting sort of in time with the drummer or something like that, and sort of creating not only just sort of, because a lot of guys, the way they use delays, will just have like a. And it's just sort of like an echo. But you can also use sort of delay in a different way, sort of at making it part of the song, you know. So that's really fun. This delay is actually basically what's called like a tape emulator. I don't know if you guys are familiar with sort of the way echoes sort of were done before. That's usually kind of an interesting concept. A lot of what they used for echo machines back in the day was basically tape-based echo machines. So
real.
yeah, I mean it's before my time, but I actually it's something that's like old vinyls. It still hasn't yet to be sort of reproduced. And basically, what it would do is you would have a recording head, a playback head, and an erase head, and the tape would be doing its thing, and basically it would record your sound, and then the distance between the recording head and the playback head will be your delay time. So basically, in the travel of the tape, as soon as the tape hits the playback head, basically your echoed note will sort of repeat, and then it'll erase itself once it gets to the erased head. And that distance between the recording head and the playback head would basically change the sound. And what a lot of guys sort of started to realize about tape machines is when they start to get all rickety and start to have mechanical failures, they start to make beautiful sounds. What will happen is the what's called a capstan roller, what the roller is doing on the tape, will actually start like a flat spot. So basically, it'll sort of, when it gets to that flat spot, the tape will sort of will slow down or speed up, and basically, sort of the tape will almost like warble itself. So this pedal sort of does the exact same thing. Is it's got a little bit of a warble to it, but it also has it's also degrading faster, and that's what happens when a tape sort of gets old. Sort of starts to detune itself. So that's a really cool sort of popular thing people are starting to do nowadays with echoes, is try to emulate sort of tape sounds. And before I go on to the other fun part of delay pedals, to sort of explain my sort of approach to music has always been to sort of never sort of lose that sort of attitude that you were a kid and sort of just went around and sort of wreck stuff and be as obnoxious as possible. Like I was the worst kid when it came to practicing guitar because I'd be really annoying. Back when I was learning how to play guitar, right after like the Led Zeppelin phase, I hit the Rage Against the Machine phase. And I don't know if you guys have listened to that stuff, but he would do like the crazy he would use like a whammy pedal, which is like an octave, and it would shift the octave up, and he'd do all these like crazy scratchies and stuff like that. And I was pretty heavy into that stuff. I mean, I wasn't really an angsty teenager, but I sort of got their message. But what sort of struck me about Tom Morello, the guitar player in Rage Against the Machine, and it's sort of been like my motto for approaching music as a whole, is when he was talking about how he uses effects pedals, and they're like, whoa, how do you make all these weird sounds, and how do you come up with this shit? His thing was basically whenever he approaches a new type of effect pedal or tries to get a new sound, he basically gets into the mindset of the kid who goes into a Long&McQuade or a Guitar Center or whatever and picks up a pedal and basically turns all the knobs all the way up and just makes weird shit and sort of keeps that sort of like innocence about trying out shit. Because a lot of times when you go into the studio, it's like, all right, well, back everything off, you know, make it sound nice, Tom, make it sound nice. But he always sort of kept that attitude of, I want to be that wild kid who just went at it and made as weird noise as possible. So I sort of related to that. It's like, all right, don't hold me back. So basically, I turned out to be the most annoying kid on the planet for learning how to use these things and approach music. I'm obnoxious. That's my thing. So when you get into effects pedals, like I said before, they're not really concerned with being safe, ordinary, or anything like that. So you get shit like that. Why did they do that now? So that gets into the sort of the noise making aspects of pedals. Pedals you don't even have to play guitar. Like, yeah. I like, all right. Like with delay pedals in general. I was doing with the delay pedal is I was basically sending it into what's called self-oscillation, which is basically the delay pedal's repeats are all the way up, so it's just repeating over and over again. Like the repeats knob on a delay basically controls the amount of repeats that it does. So like if you go bop, 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 it does 3 repeats. Having it all the way up basically has infinite amount of repeats. So eventually it starts to repeat the repeats and so forth. So it starts to sort of basically do whatever it wants.
Sorry, can I ask a question? A rental of electron drum kits.
Yep.
Where would it be?
Upstairs, brand new in the box. In the
Oh, yeah,
stock.
new one in the box?
Yeah, there's 3 pieces.
3 boxes?
3 boxes.
Cool, thanks.